Alright, so in this lesson, I kind of want to talk about interior lighting, and I've already lit this set, and I kind of just want to break it down. I would show you the whole process I took to lighting this, but this lesson would end up being 3-4 hours long, so that's kind of how long it took me to light this. And just because it's such an intense scene, such a high poly production kind of model, so I kind of just want to go through the lights kind of individually. So I started off with the key moon bounce, or the key moon light. So let's go ahead and hide out these other ones. Where is it at? Select that. Here it is. So it's just, I like to make the main light, whether it's the sun or the moon, I like to make it just one massive light, just so I know that this is the moonlight. I can scale it down just a little bit. But let's go ahead and go into the attributes. It's got a blue color to it, kind of a high intensity. Make sure it's got specular shadows, ray trace shadows. I gave it, some good amount of rays, and give it a little bit of a light angle just to give that soft edge to it. What I also had to do was come in and make sure that I light linked or remove that light link from all of these window panes. So what I did was I selected each individual light, and I went through all of these, and then after I did that, I shift selected the light and then went up to rendering, lighting and shading, and then I went to break lights. So what that does is remove that connection between those glass panes and this light. So that'll allow that light to kind of come through, and that's just like a little cheat I use to kind of get that nice shadow and light to come spill down in here. So let's go ahead and move on. The next, I'm going to organize these a little bit out of order. The next thing I did was start to add a little bit of fill light. So I think that's all. You've seen me do this before, where I kind of place a few fill directional lights just to kind of fill in those dark areas, but also maintain some of that shading. So this one kind of acts as that bounce light as well. So a lot of the light coming from this angle is kind of a blue bounce light. So I've got that, and I've got a few other bounce lights. So they're kind of a real dark blue color with a real low intensity. Make sure that the specular is off and they have no shadows. So that kind of gives us an overall bounce light, or fill light, I'm sorry. Then I started to increase the render time by adding a lot of these bounce lights. So if I go ahead and unhide all these bounce lights, you can see a whole ton of them. I'm going to go ahead and just unhide everything so we can see everything. So what I thought was, once this light comes in this window, it's going to kind of hit the model right here and kind of bounce up. So this light kind of acts as a fake between these top lights, and as well as the light that would hit this kind of bounce down and then come back down. So I kind of put it right in between the window and the wall just to kind of fake the light from this area. Then I have the main bounce, which is where the moonlight hits the ground, hits that marble floor, and then it kind of bounces up and spills over everything. So then I also had a few lights underneath this carpet just to kind of give an overall fill to everything. So we can see kind of the attributes of these. I turned off the specular to hide that. I gave these a quadratic decay because I didn't want them to fill and light up everything up here and back here. I wanted to make sure that they only lit this column. Here's another few more fill lights. These are back here are a little different. They have more blue and kind of a different intensity than the ones up here, just because of the way the camera was looking. Then I went in, let me go ahead and turn on these textures so you can see. Since these flags are red, blue light doesn't mix well, so they came out really dark. So I had to create their own special lights that are light linked to these flags. So I turn off the illuminates by default, I turn off the specular, and then I created that light link for each one of these lights, just so that they could have their own special light. And I did the same up here as well. So these flags up here on top have their own kind of light, just to give it a nice little soft light coming from beneath. And over here, it's just the same thing, just duplicate those lights. And back here, I kind of just created a point light, just to kind of overall light this back room. It was just kind of too dark back here, so I gave it a high quadratic fall off and a high intensity, just to kind of fill in a lot of that fake bounce kind of light coming around. So that's pretty much my lighting setup. Now if we go ahead and go into our render cam, this is the angle that I chose to render it at, and let's go ahead and just take a test render. Alright, so you can see kind of how all those bounce lights and fill lights kind of work together, and just give you a real soft blue light everywhere. You can see how these specific lightings, flag lightings kind of work, how they give it nice fake bounce light. So it looks really nice. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is take this frame and start to incorporate some of the layers that I like to use and passes and stuff. So let's go ahead and just save this out. Put it in the desktop. We'll create another one. We'll just call this interior renders or something. And we'll just call this our color pass. Alright, so now that we got set up, let's go ahead and go into our render layers. Select our castle set, create a new render layer, and let's decide the kind of layers that we want to use. So I guess we'll go ahead and do an ambient occlusion pass or layer. And we'll also do a depth layer, so we'll just do a Z depth layer. I think that's just the main two that I like to use. I don't really see any point for an RGB matte or anything else. So let's go ahead and just set these two up. So we can either create the shader in the hypershade or just use our little presets. So I like to just use the presets. We'll use the ambient occlusion, so you can see how everything in this set now has that shader on there. Let's go back to our layer editor, and we'll also do the luminance depth depth shader. So now that that's gone there, we're going to want to adjust these. So remember that I like to kind of break these connections and kind of fine tune what I think is a good depth layer or depth preset. So let's go ahead and we'll just start at 100, or yeah, 100, and just work our way down. Alright, so 100 max might be a little too short. Let's try 1,000. See what that gives us. So that's a nice kind of gradient. We might even want to go a little bit closer. So let's try 800. See what that gives us. So that's starting to look pretty good. I still think that there's a lot of white in here. We're still missing a lot of that gradation. So if we were to bring this max any closer, a lot of that back would start to just go pure black. So we can actually decrease our min. So let's go with negative. Let's try negative 30. So that's starting to look a little bit better. We're getting a little bit more gradation. Let's see what happens if we go negative. Well, actually, I should have done 300. So let's try 300. Alright, so I think that's a pretty decent gradient depth. So let's go ahead and just save that out. And again, I'm just using PNGs. For production, I would go with a higher quality image, like a TIFF or something. But for now, I just like to test out with PNGs. So we'll call this our Z depth. Next, we'll go ahead and try out our ambient occlusion shader. So let's select that. Let's go into our attribute editor. here's ambient occlusion shader. So we can just change that to ambient occlusion. And we're going to want to adjust these. So we'll move this up to 32, max distance. We'll try 50. Now this is going to take a while, so let's go ahead and just select the render region and see how that looks. Let's try this right here. Alright, so that looks pretty decent. Remember that we're lighting an interior scene, so the ambient occlusion is mainly just to kind of grab all that detail in the cracks and all that. If we were an exterior scene, then we would want to rely more on this ambient lighting. But since this is an interior, let's just go ahead and, I think, worry about those details that this pulls out. So let's take a full render. Alright, so here's our occlusion layer. Let's go ahead and save this out. Let this load. I'll just call this ambient occlusion. And I've decided that I do want an RGB pass. I think that those red flags might need some adjusting. So let's go ahead and create that. Let's go into our hypershade and let's create those shaders. So we don't need all three, we just need 2 colors. So we'll go ahead and pull up this, create 2 surface shaders, double click, and this one will give it just a pure blue, so, and this one will be pure red. So what we can do is make sure that we're on the right layer, RGB, kind of zoom out. We're gonna assign everything that blue material. Let that attach, and then we're going to come in and actually we'll turn on wireframe just so we can see. And we're going to select all of these flags. So I think they're in a group. No, they're not. Select that. That one. That one. That one. There you go, and we'll assign that red material. So now we have our mats. So let's go ahead and move back into our render cam. You can turn off that wireframe. And we're going to go ahead and take a render. And this should go pretty quickly, hopefully. Alright, so that took about 20 seconds. If we were to render it in my software, it would take only a couple seconds. So we can go ahead and save this one out, and we'll call this just our RGB, even though it's just R and B. So I think that's about it. If we think we need any other layers or passes, we can go ahead and come back in. But let's go ahead and just save what we have now, and I'm going to go ahead and open up After Effects, and we'll start to composite all these different layers. Alright, so here we are in After Effects, and let's go ahead and just import that footage that we just saved out. So interior render, and we can go ahead and just select all 4 of these. Now let's first start off with our color pass. So import that, and should create a new composition. There you go. Now let's go ahead and, now if we think that it's too dark or too light, we can adjust it. So I think it might be just a little too dark. So let's go ahead and throw curves on it and put that right on there. Maybe I want the darks to stay kind of dark, but I want the lights to kind of get a little bit brighter. So let's go ahead and just adjust that. There you go. Oops. So we can see the effect that did. Now I could have saved out each individual light, but I kind of liked where I left off. So I'm just going to go ahead and save some time, render all that in one pass, just for the purposes of this training. I just want to give a little bit more attention to compositing. and kind of go over this again. So next we'll do the occlusion. So with the occlusion we got to do a multiply. So let's see, it's going back to normal. There you go. Alright, so as I turn this off and on, you can see kind of all that detail that brings. You're going to notice that there's a white line that appears at the edge of the alpha channel, and that's because of we rendered a white scene on a black background. So what we can do is go into right click on our ambient occlusion footage. We can actually turn off that alpha channel. So if we go into interpret footage main, we can just ignore that, and that'll kind of fill in that white background. Now when we turn that back on, or actually now we've got that white background, so we actually don't want that white background. Let's go back in here, and actually we're going to want to pre-multiply it. So right now it was rendered on a white background, but we want it to be on a black, so we're going to have to just change this pre-multiply to white and hit OK, and that should kind of help out with that. Let's also do that with the color as well. Or what we can do is, since there's nothing in the background, let's set this to ignore, and we'll just create a background. So this should get rid of that. We'll just create a black background the size of our comp and put that in the back, and that should get rid of that. So now we've got rid of that little white outline that you can get from your anti-aliasing. So I think that's pretty good. We may want to adjust the color on this. We don't want kind of black. We kind of want a little bit more color in there. So let's colorize that and give that more of a blue color, a dark blue, since we're staying with the blue. Something like that. So let's unsolo that, and you can see now it's giving us a little bit more color. We even may want to kind of dial that down just a little bit. Maybe 69% is pretty good. Now let's work on our Z depth layer. So actually let's work on our RGB layer. So we're going to want to separate the flags from the rest of the scene. So let's go ahead and duplicate this color, and we're going to add the set matte. So oops. And we're going to put this on both color layers. So let's bring in that RGB layer. We can just hide it. We don't need it in there. Select the first one, and this will be our background. So we're going to choose the RGB, and we'll choose blue. So if we turn off that, we're going to see that now we're only just showing everything that had that blue material on it. And we'll do the same for this top one. So RGB, and we'll pick red. So now we only have the flags. We turn both layers on. It's basically combining and recreating that image again. But now we can name this flags, and we know that this layer is only the flags. So let's go ahead and increase the levels on just the flags. So maybe we want more like a brighter flag, darker flag. I think they just need to be a tad brighter. There we go. So that's how you can adjust individually without having to render out these flags separately. So that's one way. Alright, so let's go on to our Z depth layer. We can go ahead and add some fog. So let's put this above everything, and we'll call this fog. And the way fog works is the further away something is, the lighter it'll get. So we're going to need to invert this since we want the white to be further away. So let's go ahead and just drop an invert on that fog, and then hit add. So right now it's going to be really blown out. We may actually want to change the color of that fog. Maybe the air has a little bit of blue dust in it, so we'll just do a hue and saturation as well. Colorize that, and we're probably going to want to turn down the brightness just to kind of get some color in there, and then we'll give it a blue. go. Unisolate that, and then lower that opacity down a lot. And remember, we can always adjust it even further, give it a levels, and start to dial in and get a good fog that we want. So maybe something like that, and then lower that down a lot. So that just gives us just a little bit of atmosphere in the air. You can see that we start to kind of fade out that color. And we can also use this Z depth as a depth of field. So like we did before, let's create a new adjustment layer, and we'll call this depth of field. Oops. There you go. We'll attach a lens blur to that. Not a lens flare, but a lens blur. Select our depth layer, and maybe we want just that background to be in focus. So I think everything's good now. We just need to lower the intensity. So we'll half that. Maybe that's too much. We can go even further. We'll go 4. There you go. So it's a real subtle blur, but you can see how it's blurred up here and it's in focus back there. So if we want that to be in focus, or if we invert it, then we can have that back there blurred out, and the shadow, you know, in focus. So that's pretty cool. Now there are a few other tricks we can do. We can actually there's another camera effect called well, we can give it a glow. So there's 2 ways to do a glow. There's actually a glow filter within After Effects, which works sometimes, doesn't always work, but we can try a glow. And it's actually just called glow. So it's under stylize, glow. And right away it's gonna really blow everything out, but we're gonna have to adjust these settings. So we'll increase the threshold, and we can increase that radius if we want. Maybe a little too much. So there's a real subtle glow in there. You can also take this whole composition that we created, which is called color right now. We can just call this just comp or something. But you can take the whole composition and now put it in another comp. So all that work we did is inside here. Now what we can do is duplicate that, give this like a Gaussian blur, blur that out, and then add that. So now we can, you know, kind of create our own little blur. There's a soft blur. There's a lot of ways you can manipulate layers within layers. So that's the soft way to do a blur, glow. There's also another camera effect lens called it's called a chromatic aberration, and what that is when you take an image from a camera, depending on how the camera works, the colors towards the edge kind of start to bleed in and out of each other. So you can notice that towards the edge of film and things like that. So this can give it a real authentic look. So if we take this whole comp and duplicate it, we can go ahead and separate each channel. So let's go ahead and go to shift channels as an effect, and we're going to go ahead and apply this to all 3 of these. And this is a pretty common technique. It gives you a nice filmic look. So what this does is allows you to kind of isolate each channel. So right now, let's say we want only the red to show, then we turn off the green and the blue. So now this only consists of red colors, and we're going to do the others, but we'll turn off the red and we'll turn off the blue. So now we've got only green, and then we'll turn off the red and the green. So now this is only blue within this image. Now if we turn them all back on and add the top 2, we're essentially just recreating our render. So now we're back to square one, but now we have control over each one. We have R, and then we have G, and then our blue. So we can go in and we can actually just shift it over to the left 1 pixel and choose the green and shift that over to the right 1 pixel. So it's a real subtle effect, but if you kind of zoom in, you can kind of see kind of that color bleeding back here and right here and right here. So that gives it a real film look. Another way to get a film look is to give it some noise or grain. The grain effect in After Effects is pretty expensive and it takes a while to calculate, but the noise is pretty quick, so let's go ahead and give it a bit of a noise just to kind of tie everything together. And we'll kind of just increase that. Oh, way too much. Maybe like 5%. Nope, too much. 2%. There you go. So now we got a little bit of grain in there, and it kind of gives everything just like a real authentic, old, vintage look. You know, this is a stylistic choice. By no means do you have to do this, but this is just different techniques, and I hope to show you some new techniques as we go along. So that's pretty much it as far as how I set up this interior scene. I will be creating some more videos in the future, but I hope you enjoyed what I've showed you so far. And if you have any questions, or if you think that I didn't go in depth too much with a certain with anything, if I didn't show you the node-based compositing or anything, just send me an email, use the website, send me an email, and I'll be more than happy to create a video or expand upon something. And I'll be creating some more content, so don't worry, I'll be creating more sets, more characters, and we're gonna have some fun. So alright, I hope you enjoyed this series, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.